comes a rain, with my anger comes a tide of emotion, killing joy, cutting steel across your eyes. Are you dead or insane as you stumble through the night, soothe the anger?
Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock Blog, and I'm here with Jeremy Bai for another episode of the Righteous Blood podcast. And today we're going to be talking about Swordsman and the Enchantress and the 11th Son. Swordsman and the Enchantress is a 1978 film directed by Chor Yuen. It stars T. Lung, and it's based on the book 11th Son by Gu Long. It takes a lot of liberties. We've sort of been delving into exactly how many, because the 11th Son is actually part of a two-part series, and only the first book is translated into English, and I've only read the first book as a result, and I believe, Jeremy, you've only read the first book as well. I don't know if and so, you know, we tried to find some synopses of the second book in order to clarify how much of the film was invented versus how much was just taken from the second book. But the end result is, if you read the 11th Son and you watch the Swordsman and the Enchantress, they end up being quite different stories, I think, or at least the overall feeling of them is very different in a lot of ways. But there are similarities too. So Jeremy, why don't you start and just talk about, you know, I don't know, how you feel about the 11th Son as a book, and how you feel about Swordsman and the Enchantress as a movie.
Well, this is, in terms of the book, is probably one of the pivotal books for me, because back when I was first getting interested and looking into wuxia, this was around the year 2000, which was when Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out. That's what did it for me, what kind of got me interested. This was, I don't have the book in front of me. I have it in the other room. I don't remember the publication date, if it came out before. I think it
was
came
like
out
2005, I think.
Yeah, it was a few years after Crouching Tiger, because when Crouching Tiger came out, it kind of spawned a translation like craze, sort of. In any case, this was one of the first that was available for purchase. That was like an official translation. It still is one of the very few that's available, and I think it's the only Gulong one that's an official translation, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Because I've
so it was very pivotal for me. Like, I really, you know, I was excited to have an actual physical printed wuxia book that I could read. And the thing is, though, you know, I bought it. It probably was the year it came out, so it would have been 2005. I may have picked it up like a year later or something. I forget. But, you know, here we are in 2021. It's quite a few years since I've read it. I've had it on my shelf. Well, I didn't have it on my shelf in China. I left it here in my hometown when I moved to New York City, and then to China, and then came back. And I found it in the attic of my dad's like storage room or whatever when I moved back and was going through old stuff. So that's a roundabout way of saying I haven't read it in a long time. So I actually don't really remember a lot of the very specific details. Like, there's little flashes that jump out. One of them that I never forgot about for all of the years was the description of that really freakish guy in the beginning. You know, he has like one arm longer than the other. I think he's called the Hawk King or something like that. Yeah. And I did a blog post recently about Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades, where I quoted that section, just because I never forgot that description of that guy, even though it doesn't really have much to do with the story in general. I think he gets killed.
I forget if he dies. I think he does, but he might just end up getting like his arm cut off or something. I can't remember exactly what happens. But
the point is, he's not like a main character or something. Then I remember the ending. So I don't remember a lot of the details of the novel, but I do remember the impression it left on me. I put this on my list of top 5 wuxia recommendations when I did a YouTube video on the subject recently. But again, I don't remember a lot of the specific plot details, because it's been probably about 15 years since I read it. But I do remember how much I liked it, and I do remember the feeling that it left me when I finished reading it. I did read it a couple times back when I originally got it. I remember it being very emotionally impactful to me when I finished reading it. So it's always held a place in my heart, and I would still recommend it. And one of these days I'm going to go back and read it. I probably will read it in Chinese this time, since I can read Chinese now. And then switching to the movie. I hadn't watched the movie before.
This was your first viewing of the movie?
Either that, or I did watch it and like forgot about it because of not realizing the connection with the book.
Well, and that's easy to do with Shaw Brothers films, because if you watch a lot of them, like, they do kind of blend together after a while sometimes. It's like, I call it the Taco Bell effect, when like there's a lot of ingredients that are similar, just arranged in different orders sometimes, and you know.
Right. And to be honest, like I didn't dislike it in any way, and it's really cool, but it's not one that I feel would be particularly memorable for me personally. I liked it and whatnot, but there wasn't, like there's some movies like, I don't know, Killer Klans or whatever, where it's just like they're very, very iconic, and this I feel like wasn't one of those. In any case, I liked it, and to me, actually, one thing it did do was it cemented even further how much I like T Long. I just really like him. He's cool. And I think even though again the movie wasn't massively memorable, he played a character that was, he can play so many different characters, and so I kind of liked that. I really like his style, and I like him. And other than that, there's so much stuff in the movie that comes across in the game. But as you and I were kind of going back and forth before hitting the record button, I don't think there's anything specifically in it that we haven't talked about before. But it does have all of the same kind of things we do talk about. It has the plot twists, and it has the character interactions, and it has the eccentric characters, and it has just all these different elements. There is one unique aspect, which is the mansion and the puppets, they call it in the translation of the movie that I watched on Amazon. I can't remember what they call them in the book, if they call them dolls or they call them puppets.
They were translated as dolls, but in the movie, puppets made more sense, because there's a line in there where he says, in reality, all men are puppets. And so it kind of tied everything together. I don't remember a line like that being in the book. It might have been, but I can't remember. I mean, and it's funny. So my experience with the book is I usually read it every couple of years or so, and I reread it for this podcast, but I'm not the best at remembering specific details even after I've read something. So I don't know if that is in there, but the book was one that had a very big effect on me, because I was always like, you kind of dived right into the whole wuxia reading thing and everything, and I was a lot more reluctant, because most of what was out there was either translations I wasn't super happy with when I looked into them, like the Jin Yong translations of like Deer in the Cauldron and stuff like that. Like I just had trouble getting excited about those, and most of it was stuff online. And as a writer, I was always worried, well, if I read online translations, is that going to affect my writing? Do you know what I mean? Like, is that going to make me, just because it's like most of the fan translations are fan translations, so you don't know, what the quality level is going to be like. And so Eleventh Son was one of I think it was the first wuxia story I read. And I fell in love with it right away. And I also realized how different a wuxia book versus a wuxia movie is when I read it. Because I was like, oh, wow, like you can really get into descriptions that don't translate well onto screen. Do you know what I mean? There's just like things in there that don't translate into screen. And I thought that I don't know, that was my first, like, I had seen a ton of movies based on Gulong stories. I didn't realize till I read that book just how much of an impact he had on so many of the movies I liked. And I didn't realize, just how, that's just kind of when Gulong opened up for me. And that's when I started looking into reading. That's when I was like, okay, I got to read more stuff by this guy, because I like this one. And for people that don't know the story, it's pretty simple. It's basically one of these tales where a weapon called Deer Carver gets dropped into the martial world, and people kind of start fighting over it, and there's a group that's supposed to be escorting it, and it opens up with a character named Feng Xinliang, who's she's kind of a harlot type character, right? Not a harlot, but she's kind of like she's a little more racy than your normal wuxia heroine, I would say. And she's friends with Zhao Xilang, but she wants to acquire the weapon, so she has all these people she wants to team up with. It turns out Zhao is like gone and like maimed all of them for various reasons. So she ends up having to kind of, team up with him. And there's this whole thing where she tries to get the deer carver blade. And oddly enough, in the story, that plot thread kind of falls by the wayside, I feel like. And then it really becomes about this story between Zhao Xilong and the wife of the guy who is supposed to be escorting the deer carver blade. And it turns into this story that's really about the hypocrisy of sort of the elite martial heroes who are like well-bred landed gentry types, and guys like Zhao Xilong, who's sort of more of a wanderer and comes from a lower birth, and he falls in love with this woman who's part of that higher order. And then the culmination of the book, they find themselves trapped in this dollhouse that you're not sure if it's really they've been shrunken down and put in this house, or if they're being misled, and they have to face off with this terrifying villain who I think his name is translated as Count Carefree. There's a lot more to the story than that, but that's kind of the bare bones. And then the movie is basically kind of that story, but they throw in a bunch of other elements and they tell it in different order, and they downplay some of the characters, like Feng Xinyang isn't that important in this story. I kind of agree with you. I don't think the movie is like, it's not exceptional like Heroes Shed No Tears or the Brave Archer series, or something that like really stands out as like, wow, I really like, it's like really top quality. It's still really high level wuxia though. I think it's like, like I would give it a solid B plus for a grade. And I think one of the things that's good about the movie is it has all these weird, wacky elements that like this would be okay to show to somebody as their only, if you wanted to give somebody an example of what wuxia can be, it would be okay to show them this movie as a solo example, because I think it's got enough of the tropes crammed into it that, I mean, there's even they even work Mei Chao Feng in there at one point into the backstory of one of the sects, so which is from another writer. So there's a lot of stuff here, and I also agree with what you were saying about Ti Lung. I think his performance in this is particularly good. And even though it's kind of an odd movie that in some ways the storyline doesn't quite make a lot of sense when you really start to think about it, I feel like Ti Lung does a lot to really make you believe everything, even if stuff that's going on is kind of not as believable as it is in other movies.
Yeah, I think there are some oddities about the movie. I think, for instance, I was watching it with my wife at the lunch table today, because I was racing to finish watching it. I have two kids. One's 7 months now, one's 5 years, and so sometimes, depending on the timing, it can be rough to sit down and actually watch a movie. Point is, I was watching it at the table with my wife. No, she's Chinese, and there were like plot points that were intended to be like mysterious, or like, for instance, the thing you were mentioning about the dollhouse and different things that are intended to be, and I think in the book they come across as being mysterious, but my wife was literally just calling them out. She knew nothing about the movie, and she's like, oh well, it's probably like this, and I was like, and she's never seen it or anything. So I feel like there was something kind of, I don't even know how to put my finger on it, but there was something kind of like maybe rushed about the production, or or maybe the script. I honestly don't really know, but I just found it kind of funny and weird that she was identifying the secret plot elements without any knowledge or anything, just by what they were saying and stuff.
Well, let me ask you this: is it possible that she's seen one of the Zhao Xilong series and remembered, or
no? She like other than I think Demigods and Semidevils, or I always forget. Is it Semigods?
I get it. I get it reversed all the time too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Other than that, and there's a couple really classic 80s wuxia TV shows that were really popular. Other than those, she's not really like a big fan. Like, she liked that stuff when she was a kid, but she's not a wuxia groupie. I think it's also possible it's just she's also not much of an old movie buff. Like, she likes new stuff. She likes modern stuff with, like, it's good special effects and whatnot. So I think sometimes older movies are just an acquired taste for some people, I guess you could say.
Well, whenever I try to get younger people to watch the Shaw Brothers films, the first thing that I usually hear is, what's with all the stages? Like, why is this all happening on a stage? So
Yeah.
It definitely has a look that might not appeal to a modern audience. I think there is a difference. I think another aspect of it too, though, is the book. And again, I'm going by the translation. I don't know how it sounds in the original Chinese, but even in translation, I really felt like there was a kind of dreamy quality to a lot of the prose and a lot of the way he described things. So that by the time you got to the dollhouse, you were already almost kind of drunk on the prose, and it sort of said, well, okay, I've bought all this other stuff. Why not? People shrinking down in size and go, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, and I think too in the movie, I don't know what it is, but I feel like it's a little more obvious somehow. I can't quite put my finger on it. And obviously I can't recapture the experience of not knowing and seeing it for the first time, but I feel like it is a little bit more obvious. But it also doesn't kind of matter, because I feel like the real story is about Zhao Xilong and the Shen Bijun romance, right? So like them being trapped in the house is almost, to me, what the thing that I like about the book versus the movie. The movie ends with what you expect in a wuxia film, which is you get a big battle at the end, right? You get like a series of little battles, then a big battle at the end. And the book doesn't really end with a big fight scene, right? It ends with him being trapped in this dollhouse and a bunch of investigative work, and then like little minor clashes here and there, and then a big confrontation that takes place off camera that you don't know the end of. So
Yeah, well, I did some digging on Baidu to check about the second book, to see kind of if you were wondering if the movie kind of tries to incorporate elements from the second book, and I didn't really get a good answer to that, because the Baidu, so there's a Wikipedia in China run by Baidu, so the Baidu wiki has just about every wuxia book and everything, but it doesn't have very really elaborate summaries. Some do, some don't. And for the second book, the follow-up, I think whoever wrote the summary didn't want to spoil the end, so they made the summary more like the back of a book, like kind of trying to get you to read it. It has character profiles for all the main characters, and based on the information in the profile, I think that the ending of the movie, this is, again, don't take this as gospel if you're a movie buff or interested in the story. But basically, I don't think the ending of the movie is relevant to the second book in the second book at all. I think they basically just made up a new ending to fit what they thought was a better story or something. And then the second book essentially picks up, from what I can tell, picks up from where the first book ends, and then actually tells the story. So I think that, me and you have gone back and forth about this in the past, about whether this was a complete translation, because I was under the impression, I think as you were, that it wasn't a complete translation. So that's kind of true and kind of not true. It is a complete translation of the book, but I think it's intended to be read as two books, basically.
Okay. So here's my thing though. I actually, when I first read it, I thought it was a complete translation. I thought that was just I thought it was just like the twist was the fight happens off camera, and what really matters is what's going on with Feng Shenyang and Yang Katai and their whole romance and her realization. And then it wasn't until you mentioned that it was a cliffhanger that I started to,
Really?
Yeah. You were the one that brought that up to me. I didn't know, because when I think when I first looked it up, Wikipedia was basically where I went to look up the Gulong list, right? And I don't think that, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they only had the first 11th Son on there. I don't think they had the second one on there. And if they did, I didn't see it. So I thought it was just a standalone novel. I had no idea.
Yeah. I don't remember what I was thinking back then or how I got the idea, but I also got the impression that it was an incomplete story. Based on the Baidu wiki, it looks to me like the first book came out in 1969, and then the second one didn't come out till 1973. So I imagine that who knows whether he envisioned it as being a two-part story and then just waited a few years to write the second one, or if he did envision it to just end that way and then later was like, hey, you know what, I want to tell the rest of the story. I don't know. I think, my work for the past several years has been translating fantasy novels, primarily the Xianxia stuff. I haven't actually translated a wuxia story for a really long time. And one of these days, if I have the time, I kind of dream of going back to doing that. On the downside, it's not really financially viable to translate wuxia novels. The market just, for the most part, can't support that as a full-time work. Second problem is that, based on my understanding, there is some unknown media company that bought the rights to all of Gulong's works. I think that's what I've been told. The owner of Wuxia World has connections with not all of, but with many big publishers in China, including ones that do traditional publishing of like printed novels and whatnot. And that's what he told me. He said that he heard from somebody that the Gulong rights were bought up. He didn't know who they were or what they planned to do with them. So that's another problem. But who knows? Maybe one day, if I have the time to do a fan translation again, I might translate the second 11th Son novel just so that I can find out what happens, because I'm curious as well.
Yeah, I'd really like to know. But I will say, I think the story works on its own, just because that is such an interesting way to end a story, where it's sort of like it's sort of like, because the thing that happens is they both go off to fight carefree together, so it's sort of like they both are, clearly kind of acknowledging their love and facing whatever doom they have to face. But I like that it then shifts focus to the character it opened with, which is the Feng character, and I always kind of liked her as I just thought she was she opens up it's a very famous scene in all the shows. They usually open with the scene where she's in the bath in the inn on like the Bandit Mountain, and she gets attacked, and then it's just this great scene. But I like that the story kind of shifts to sort of like what's going on internally with that character, which is something, again, you don't really see in the movie because her relationship to Zhao is so different in the film. But yeah, I think in terms of the ending in the film, it's so different. Like in the book, at least in the first book, maybe in the second book, it retcons a lot of stuff. But in the first book, Shen Bijun and Zhao Xilong are clearly in love, and it always struck me as a plot that was kind of like that film Lost in Translation. Do you know what I mean? There's like the whole thing is he's having an affair with a married woman. Do you know what I mean? And so like the reason that they're never that I think it makes sense for them to end up at the dollhouse is it's kind of like this time for them to like really hash out that drama. Do you know what I mean? It feels very natural, and you don't feel the need for a big battle to arise just because there's so much human drama going on. And in the movie, they end up making her the secret daughter of Lord Tian, and I don't know, that I guess it's still not totally contradictory because she still says she's in love with Zhao, but it's just a really weird twist, because then when you go back and think of all the things that happened, it just, I don't know, it just feels like it doesn't quite line up. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, did you have that same reaction, or did you think that it lined up okay?
Actually, the funny thing is, this is one of the things my wife like picked up on, which was, and again, I haven't read the book in a long time, so I kind of remember the vague general plot, but I couldn't remember all the details. She almost immediately was like, "Oh, I bet you she's actually working for the dollhouse people."
Okay,
and I was like, "You know
right.
what? I honestly can't remember if she is or not. I didn't
At
remember."
what point in the movie
on.
did she say that? I'm very curious.
What?
At what point in the movie did she make that observation?
I think it was when they went in and drank the tea. It was roughly around that part. I don't remember specifically, like, if there was one line of dialogue that prompted her to say that, but I was like, I couldn't remember, and then as I was watching it happen, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. So it's hard to say. I think, pure speculation, I just wonder if it was something that was planned from the beginning in the production, or if it just happened naturally. Because if it happened naturally, then maybe that would explain why. What I mean by naturally is maybe they got to that point and they were like, let's switch things up, and it wasn't planned in the script, or maybe it was. I don't know. If it happened, kind of spontaneously, then maybe that would explain why it didn't make sense to you. I don't know. I
mean, it's one of these things too, where sometimes you can get too picky. Like, I feel like, I don't know. I suppose I'd have to really go back with a fine-tooth comb to really look at it and say for sure. But I just feel like some of those earlier scenes, when I see her acting, I don't feel like I get any sense that there's some hidden agenda. Do you know what I mean? I think that's the part that sort of, least that I mean. I guess it's possible she had one. It wasn't being revealed, but it just seems kind of odd. I mean, that said, I still like it. I think it's a cool twist. I think it made for like a really nice melodramatic moment, and I like the emotional note it ends on, where he has that line about the flower, the flower blooming every year will be the same as seeing her grave, or something like that. It's kind of got the nice sort of melodramatic punch that you like to get at the end of a big wuxia finale. So, I thought it all worked. I just don't think it just wasn't as powerful as like the Hero Shed No Tears movie was for me. Do you know what I mean? Where there are these scenes where I was just stunned when I saw them, and I was like, did I really just see that happen? Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
There's another thing that I just thought of in connection with what you were saying about her turning out to be working for the other side that seemed to come out of nowhere. It relates to something I was going to bring up earlier, which is the language aspect. And for the most part in this podcast we've been doing, I've kind of tried to not get too much into language stuff because I think it's not particularly relevant to what we're talking about. But in this one, I did notice some language things. And on the one hand, I was actually kind of half watching the movie and listening to it, which is hard to do sometimes with wuxia. For me, depending on the level of Chinese, like sometimes it's, if you're watching something like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy in English, like if you're watching, I don't know, like maybe CSI or something, where maybe CSI isn't a good example, but if the dialogue is one way, you can do something else and listen to the TV show and still get it. But if you're in other shows, you can't do that. This was one where my Chinese level was good enough that I didn't really need to actually watch it and read the subtitles to understand it. Their Chinese was pretty clear and not too complicated. And so I was kind of half watching, but on numerous occasions I looked over and was actually looking at the subtitles, and they were just wrong. And so, and for instance, there's one specific scene, I actually wrote this down to talk about before we got into the whole, her betrayal seeming to come out of nowhere. There's one part where this is the scene where Xiao Shilong goes back to where they planted the flower or whatever, and then Shen Bijun is there, and they kind of talk, and then the girl jumps out. Yeah, the bad guy girl.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about that girl too at some point.
Okay, we'll talk about her in a second. But the point is, in the English subtitles, he goes, "What are you doing here?" And in the English subtitles, she says, "I followed you here." But that's not what she says in Chinese. In Chinese, he goes, "What are you doing here?" And her answer is, "I'm here with Shen Bijun."
Okay.
She says, "I came here with her." So it's like totally different in Chinese. And so, and that was just one random thing that I noticed. And I'm curious, or I would have to go back, because again, I try not to focus too much on language aspects for the Righteous Blood podcast, because that's not the point. I just wonder if I went back and compared all the dialogue to the subtitles, I wonder if there might not be a few other little random twists here and there that might change the understanding of her character.
That's it. I think that's an interesting one. I think another one was the Feng character. Her nickname in this was Man Junkie, right? Which I was wondering, is that like that? I mean, that seemed like an awkward translation to me. But then I was like, well, maybe they wanted to go for something like that. Do you know what I mean? So like, I didn't know.
I don't think so. I think that back in these days, I mean, assuming that, I don't know where the subtitles came from, but honestly, the subtitles were just there. Like, there was another part where they had her. I just did a YouTube video about this, about translating cussing, and there was one line. It wasn't like bad cussing or something, but the Shen Bijun character said something along the lines of, "What the hell is going on here?" or "What the hell is this place?" She didn't use anything close to like "the hell" in Chinese. She just like asked the normal question. And I feel like the "what the hell" kind of amps it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But that didn't exist in Chinese, and I didn't take notes, but there were other ones like that. So I feel like maybe some of that had an effect on. I mean, it has to have an effect on your perception of it, and maybe even that aspect of her character.
So in the movie, the bad guy that you were referring to is named Little Lord, and it's played by Candy Wen, who's plays a lot of characters kind of like this, I think. But and in the book, I think it was translated as Little Mister, and it's pretty much the same character in both stories. I feel like they definitely gave the character way more screen time in the movie. Like it's a much bigger role, even though it's still a pretty substantial role in the book. It's just that the character appears earlier and stuff. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting character because in the book, it's very clear that she's going around acting like a guy. Like she's dressed as a guy and everybody thinks it's a man. And then over the course of the story, you find out it's a woman. And in the book, it's kind of there, but I feel like it's a little bit, it's like, I feel like that gets dropped a lot more quickly in the movie. I don't know. What were your thoughts on that?
I honestly don't have any big thoughts on it because her character, despite how much I know about Chinese culture and how many of these movies I've watched and how much of the stuff I've read and how much of the stuff I've translated, one of the hardest things for me to get over is the female character dressed as man character that nobody realizes is a woman except she's like obviously not. And so for her character, like, and plus I obviously know the actress as well, and so I didn't like when the part came when they like were confused that she was a man. I was like, what? How could they be? And then I'm like, oh right, she's wearing men's clothing and she has a different title and different like that.
It's just one of those conventions, I think, because like if you go back to like even earlier movies, there's a lot of films. Like I have some old horror movies from the 60s and stuff and a couple old wuxia movies where they have female actresses playing male characters. It's it's still obvious, but it's maybe not quite as obvious, but it's still obvious that it's female. But they're not meant to be disguised as a man. They're meant to be a man in the movie. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think, I think for an American viewer, that's a little jarring. But I don't know. It's in so many films that you just kind of. I feel like I've gotten used to it at this point, where it's just like that's just the.
Yeah.
She's just like a guy, so she's supposed to be a guy, and that's the.
Right. Like I totally understand it. It's just that sometimes I forget about it, and in this case, I did. Just it didn't even occur to me that she was passing herself. Of course, I think probably some of it has to do with. I think that I'm guessing that they don't want them to look that much like if they had done they could have very easily made her look much more like a male character if they wanted to. Like I think in a real life situation in ancient China, if a woman wanted to pass herself off as a man, I think it would be much easier and much more realistic. Yeah. But they kind of in some cases I think they don't really want that necessarily. And they're relying more on the audience to buy into it and get what's happening without it being super ultra realistic.
Yeah, no, and I think it's one of those things that there are just certain things that you're willing to handle. Like different styles of movie and different places of film are willing to hand wave certain things. That like I'm trying to think of an example in American movies, like the old convention of shooting the gas tank in American action movies. That you just accepted that's you shoot the gas tank, it blows up. Do you know what I mean? Didn't matter if it wasn't totally plausible. It was just a logical thing that could happen within a movie. I don't think it's a convention anymore so much, but it used to be. And I think this is one of those things where. Also, I do feel like in more recent wuxia films, it's a little bit more believable sometimes. Whereas in these ones, like the woman still has makeup on and stuff. So,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's what I mean.
So, but I think the character's very fun and interesting and vicious. She's a very vicious villain. That's what I like about her.
Like the scene where well, here's another, okay, going back, this relates again to your previous observation about the true identity of Shan Bijun character. When she meets her and then Shan Bijun is like, what are you doing here or something? She's like, I'm here to kill all these people. And then whoom, she kills her handmaids and kills everybody.
With chopsticks. She throws 2 chopsticks at the handmaids and kills them.
Speaking of chopsticks, here's a good tie-in to our game, which we didn't mention chopsticks as a weapon. And I don't know if you thought about that. I actually did think about it because I feel like, and I'm actually like, okay, I want to choose my words carefully here. The use of chopsticks as a weapon is pretty common in wuxia films, but I think a lot of what I have seen, a lot of people who aren't familiar with wuxia doing is translating that in a game into like there's a chopstick ability or something. But I don't get that read in wuxia. Like it's not like there's like I am chopstick Zhao and like I use.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Weapon.
Yeah,
it's more like they are a common improvised weapon, but not a common choice of unusual Jianghu weapon. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, no, I think martial arts in wuxia, especially like the unarmed martial arts, well, not the unarmed, but like I don't know how to put it. There's like an improvised weaponry thing that goes on where I should be able to turn like a penny into a weapon, or turn a pen into a weapon, or turn a cup into a weapon, or turn chopsticks into a weapon. And chopsticks just work visually because the person's like, especially for comedic scenes or scenes they're supposed to have like, I don't know, certain beats going on. The person's eating their food and then they're attacking somebody, and they can kind of still have that calm repose and eat while they're deflecting attackers. So I mean, you see it in a bunch of scenes, and I know that it definitely shows up in like the drunken master type movies as well, just for the comedy
Right.
purposes.
Or in I have to point out, this is just a really, really random observation that has nothing to do with anything except chopsticks, but okay, and I know you don't have kids, so you don't watch animated stuff. Have you ever watched Kung Fu Panda?
Long time
Okay, long
ago.
time. Well, the point is, there's the scene in Kung Fu Panda where there's a chopstick scene where they're like using
Okay.
chopsticks to fight for food.
Oh,
It's like
okay.
a
Okay.
complete, I don't want to say rip off because maybe it's an homage, but like that same thing happens in Iron Monkey. I don't know if you remember, but Donnie Yen's character and I forget the actor's name. It's on the tip of my tongue. The Wang Fei Hung in the sorry, no. Donnie Yen was playing Wang Fei Hung's dad in the movie, and there's like a chopstick scene where they're competing over food in the plate with chopsticks, like almost exactly from Kung Fu Panda. But anyway, the point is just, yeah. So
And
I
that's
had
a
to
really
bring
good movie, by the way, for people that haven't seen
Iron
it.
Monkey.
Yeah, Iron Monkey's a really good movie.
I see a lot of people, talking about that. In fact, we haven't talked about that in relation to Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades. I mean, it would definitely work. It's very late in Chinese history. It's like I think it's late Qing Dynasty, right? Wang Fei Hong lived
Yeah, it's
during
really
Qing Dynasty
yeah, it's
times.
much more.
So
I think
so
it's a period that I'm generally not as drawn to. Like I'll watch those movies, like I watched like the old Jet Li movies and stuff I liked and things
yeah,
like that. But I usually like stuff that's a little bit earlier, I find.
same here. But that's definitely a good one. I mean, it's the one of the difficulties with Iron Monkey is that it has a pretty significant use of firearms, and we don't touch on firearms
Yeah.
at all. So anybody, a GM who is trying to emulate that would need to homebrew some stuff. Sorry, I derailed. We were originally talking about
Well,
the
yeah.
villain's
So
character.
how we got there was, and the impressive thing about it is she impaled the two maidservants with the chopsticks.
Right, it was
That's
like,
why it was kind of cool. Yeah. So I just always liked that particular death scene. I thought it was kind of fun. But we were just talking about that scene, and I forget what you were saying. How she was
What I
saying,
was
"I'm
saying
here
is if
to
you think
kill all
about
these
it,
people."
right? But if you take a step back, does that if the Lian Chengbi's character was a traitor from the very beginning, then that entire encounter was completely set up just to get Xiao Shi Long
That's
together with her, apparently.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. I mean, and I guess it kind of works. I just think it's extremely elaborate, right? It's like it's extremely elaborate, and
And
it
also, it
depends
would
on
rely on
yeah.
a lot of coincidences.
Yeah, and people doing certain things and all that stuff, like, but again, it is the kind of film where you aren't really supposed to like
Yeah,
sometimes modern audiences get annoyingly critical. Do you know what I mean?
right. Yeah,
Like I'm involved in some unrelated gaming threads where people are really taking a fine tooth comb to another game that has nothing to do with Righteous Blood or anything like that. It's a horror game, but I'm really into. And the levels of criticism people are bringing to believability are, in my opinion, kind of ridiculous sometimes, right? And I think
yeah,
sometimes you can do that with movies instead of just relaxing and having fun. But this is a movie where I feel like every time I get to the final scene, I immediately say, "Wait, does that add up?" Do you know what I mean? Like, and you know me, I'm not normally the person to
yeah,
like. I'm not usually that picky about things like that. Usually, if anything, you're somebody who's a little more picky than
yeah.
me, and I'm the one defending it. So, but in this case, I just always ask that question. So, but yeah, so I don't know, but I still like that scene because I like how in the book there's a scene where with the poisoned eggs, and you have the whole scene with the eggs and everything, and I don't know, I think it's a good setup.
Actually, you mentioning that makes me think of something I did want to bring up, which was, and I can't remember how this was handled in the book, but it's something that did pull me out of the the movie a little bit in this in the sense that when this happened, or sorry, I'm talking about when they drink the tea. So basically, they walk in, drink the tea, and then they get knocked out.
Yeah.
To me, that really sort of was like kind of, I was like, wait a second, what? Because in wuxia, like it's such a trope that things are poisoned, and I'm like, man, these, he's supposed to be this like super top ultra, like wuxia jianghu figure, yet he just randomly goes into some really mysterious, creepy place and then just drinks the tea. Like, what? Like, wait a second.
It is a very James Bond kind of level of poison. Like he would always. I don't know. Maybe it's something people make fun of more than is a reality. But I feel like I have a lot of memories of James Bond being poisoned by a martini that he shouldn't have been poisoned by. But
I guess.
But in the book, it's a little different. I think in the book they wake up in the house and then they get the tea after seeing the thing, and so they're already kind of like residents of the house being cared for because of their wounds. And I think the tea is presented as a medicine, if I recall. I don't remember exactly. And in this one, it's actually a little bit more like it's weird because they actually kind of tell them like what's going on, and then they give them the tea. So it's not even like they say, this dollhouse, all those people are real martial heroes who have been shrunken down by a method from the no, oh, by the way, have some tea. It's a little more. I mean, I get what they were doing, because in order for the illusion to work, they need to see the miniature house and kind of have a sense of. Do you know what I mean? Like so when they wake up and everything looks like the miniature house, so they can believe that they're inside this miniature landscape. Do you know what I mean?
That scene actually made me laugh because the way it worked, the way it actually happened was, to me it came across as just being like really clumsily. Like, I get what they're like, exactly what you were saying was what they were going for, but I feel like it just. So here's what happened: they walk in. And they're like, wow, these look like real people. And he's like, well, in fact, they are real people who have been shrunken by my master and forced to live here. They can only come to life on every full moon. And then literally 1 second later, the Lian Chunbi character's like, hey, there's tea here. And like, that was it. I'm like, wait, what? Like, you just found out that they can shrink people that only come back on the full moon, and nobody's like, what? Like, they weren't surprised or anything. They were just like, oh, that's pretty interesting. All right, let's have some tea.
I think they could have done it a little bit smoother. I will say this: he did say before he mentioned all that stuff about the house. He said, you've had a long journey. You must be thirsty. I'll get some tea. So right. I think that but still, then he goes on and says that, and I think it's I don't know. I think it would make you a little bit suspicious, but maybe they were just being polite. Do you know what I mean? This is a movie where he's with this woman who is where propriety is important, and in the book you really see it. In the movie you don't quite see it as much, but in the book there are scenes where like there are men who clearly are trying to abduct her, and she goes with them because it would be improper to even suggest that they're trying to do anything but help her. Do you know what I mean? Because they're men of good reputation or something. Do you know? Yeah. And so I don't know if they were trying to do that there or not, but either way, I think that is a weird thing. On the other hand, I do like the weirdness of it, where it's like, hey, here's a movie where the characters are maybe being shrunken into a house. And
well, I think that shrunken into a house thing is a pretty cool aspect, which I want to touch on that when we have a minute to talk about drawing on this movie for sessions or campaigns or whatever. But before that, I wanted to give another thought about the poisoning thing, which I feel like this is one of those wuxia tropes, which is really, it's kind of odd, because this kind of touches on what I was talking about in one or two podcasts ago about the bodyguards. Remember, we were talking about how, like, I feel there's a presumption that low-level bodyguards aren't going to get killed in the larger setting, but in the movies it like happens every single time. I think Poison is supposed to be like that, where it's like characters get poisoned all the time in movies and in the novels, and you would think that they would be a lot more careful about it. And I guess my theory about it is, we see a higher percentage of poisonings in the novels and movies because that's what's supposed to happen. But in the real larger Jianghu, maybe it's not as common. But seriously, like, I can think of maybe not dozens, but I can think of so many movies where the wuxia main characters, who are the top figures, just eat or drink stuff and then get poisoned. And I'm thinking, like, man, like, wouldn't you guys be at least a little bit more cautious?
Have you ever seen the movie Buddha's Palm? Or Eagle
I
Shooting
have, but
Heroes, or Eagle Shooting Heroes.
I have, but those were ones that were probably at this point like 12, 13, 15 years ago. So
Okay.
it's kind of
Well,
like,
because there's a line in Buddhist poem. I forget the exact plot device, but some guy, I think he gets killed or betrayed, and the narrator's like, if only he had read more wuxia novels, he would know that he shouldn't have trusted him, and he would be alive. Just that kind of a line. I forget exactly what he said, but it was really funny. And Eagle Shooting Heroes is a parody of the genre. It's kind of it's like a but it's really wacky. It's much more wacky than Buddhist poem. But yeah, I don't know. We could have probably a very in-depth discussion about that.
yeah,
I always kind of imagine the Jianghu just being extremely violent. Do you know what I mean? Like I kind of buy into the Chor Yuen, Cheng Che, like I was just watching The Boxer from Shangtung the other day just for fun, and it's and also I might be reviewing it next week on Wuxia Weekend because I don't think we've done that. But in that movie, and again, it's not quite wuxia; it's more of a kung fu film. But that's about a guy rising up in Shanghai from nothing to becoming this big boss. But there's this theme of how it's just this cyclical thing where, there's always a guy rising up and then falling, and another guy rising up and then falling, and another guy rising up and then falling. And it's all predicated on, people that are willing to engage in this kind of violence are eventually going to die by this kind of violence, So I don't know. I feel like in a martial world where you're constantly getting into sword fights and dealing with shady characters, you're gonna get, eventually your number's gonna come up, but yeah, so
yeah. I mean, I agree. I feel like that would lead to people being generally more cautious though. But maybe that's,
I think so.
I don't know how real life. I guess the best analogy to Jianghu is the best and most easily accessible analogy is probably like mafia stuff kind of, and I don't know how mafia guys do mafia guys constantly worry about getting poisoned at restaurants, or I guess they don't.
I love mafia movies. Mafia guys always worried about getting whacked. That's their big thing. Am I gonna get, so like, am I when they go to a meeting, it's like, am I going in and somebody's just gonna shoot me in the back of the head? But there's also this thing in mafia films, and I think in the real mafia, where you just have to accept that as a risk and you go anyways. Do you know what I mean? Like, it would be like in a lot of these movies, it's kind of considered, in a lot of these shows, it's considered like bad form to just not, do you know what I mean? To almost not walk into it. Do you know what I mean? There are different takes on it, but there's definitely that's definitely one point of view that you kind of see in a lot of these films, especially one like, say, like Donnie Brasco. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I could go on and on about mafia movies.
Sure.
But
I've gotten on I don't know if you know Michael Francisi. I've been like kind of on a kick of watching his YouTube channel.
Yeah, I know that channel.
I've learned a lot about mob stuff.
I read his book too. I think he had a book many years ago. Yeah. There's a lot of I mean, I'm not as deep into it now, but there was a period where I was just constantly reading crime books written by ex-mafia people. Like Gravano had a book. There's a lot of books by ex-mafia people or people whose families were in the mafia and things like that. And I grew up in a household where mafia movies were just like on all the time. But the only other thing about the movie I want to talk about before we get to gaming it is the music. And I don't know, maybe you didn't even notice the music, but
I did. I wanted to ask you about it actually.
So just so people know, there's a lot of these movies, they have, it almost sounds like canned music sometimes. Like you sometimes think it comes from another film, but it's usually used really well. It's kind of like there's almost like a remix quality to it. Like they take some theme from like a spaghetti western movie and just really use it well to create an emotional effect. And this one was a really odd choice. I don't know what the music was. It sounds familiar, but it's got kind of like a Baroque sound to it, and it's like a harpsichord and I think an oboe, and it's a little bit delightful, but it sounds like it might be in a minor key because there's like a little bit of melancholy in it. But it's I don't know, it's not atmospheric or brooding like a lot of the music sometimes is in these kind of films. So when I first saw the movie, that was the first thing I noticed. I was like, oh, I like the sound of that music. That music intrigues me. But I don't know. What did you think of the music in the film? And what was your question about it?
I mean, well, the thing is that I mean, I basically had the same observation as you, but also the tune sounded really familiar. Like I was
Yeah.
like, this definitely has to be from something else, and I was hoping you would be able to
I no,
identify it.
I have the same thing, and like it's one of those things like why can't there be a search engine where I can just hum the song and it
Yeah.
shows up for the I like
Well,
because it's I feel like I can almost picture a movie forming in my head when I hear the music like that, but I lose it and I don't know if it was if it's just one of those things that's been in a bunch of films or if it comes from a specific movie or what.
well, I'll
I
tell
don't.
you. You know what? There is one movie that's popping to mind, and this could just be random, but maybe it's connected. I'm gonna go through to some of the spaghetti westerns I've watched recently because I've watched in the past maybe 2 years. I've watched a handful, but I remember pretty much every single one, and I feel like maybe it's from there. And specifically, there's one called My Name Is Nobody, and for some reason, it just makes me think of that. So I'm gonna go
Okay,
back and watch that. I don't know if you've seen My Name Is Nobody, but
I
it's
haven't.
kind
I
of
haven't.
okay. It's great. It's the main character is kind of a sort of a rascal, sort of roguish sort of guy,
Hmm.
and this My Name Is Nobody is one of those ones which I've mentioned to you before that is you could change the names and change the guns to swords and make a few tweaks and it could be totally be a wuxia novel. So I'll go back and listen to it. Maybe that's where I'm remembering it from. But I also had the same sort of it was like very upbeat kind of
Yeah.
like that da 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 thing. And then also the last scene has it. Like I felt like the last scene should have been like like orchestral like chorus kind of thing or I don't know something dark but it's just kind of like do 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 dee do 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 and he's like kind of walking up.
I could be wrong because I didn't figure out the melody on the guitar neck or anything, and I would need to do that to tell you what the scale is and what the key is. To me, it sounded like it's possible this is actually in a minor key, but it's played in an upbeat way. And if that's the case, might not be the case. I think one of the reasons why it's peculiar is because of that, and maybe that's why they chose it because there's sort of a combination of sadness and joviality that reflects the nature of the main character, who's kind of this wandering vagabond who is sort of accepting all of the cruelties of the world. And, just you can picture him mourning the loss of this woman, but then, devouring another bowl of eggs and getting drunk and, gazing at a tree and finding something beautiful about it, right? Like he's like that kind of character. So I don't know, but it's definitely. I mean, it definitely makes you think. You hear that music and you're like, "That's an interesting choice. I wonder why they went with that." And I don't know. I'm every time I watch the movie, I kind of am. I start thinking about the music and I don't really know why they chose it. But but anyways, yeah. So I don't know. In terms of making this into a gameable thing, my take really would probably be more to rip characters from the movie or rip things like the house concept, and I guess it would all pivot on whether I decide to go with this is going to really be a house that people get shrunken down into or whether it would be an illusion like it is in the movie. I think the drawback of the illusion approach is it's kind of a setup that like you're it's going to feel like a railroad if you do it wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like it's got to be something where you put that into the setting and you allow it to happen if it naturally arises. Like the players go there and they drink the tea and it happens. But if you push it too much just so it happens, I think the players might resent it. So I'd be a little
Yeah.
bit reluctant.
Yeah, I was saying that I when we were chatting earlier, I was saying it could be a really cool thing. So I mean, we've kind of done a lot of spoiling already, but basically, full spoilers here. Full spoilers. They get given this tea, they get knocked out in the movie at least. They get knocked out. When they wake up, they're told you have been basically, or they're not told that they assume that they have been transformed into these. They call them puppets in the movies. In the novel dolls. I think dolls in Chinese it's Wano, which is actually
All right, so we're back on. I just want to explain to people what happened was Jeremy lost power, and so that caused a disconnection. We're going to try to finish up the podcast with this, but there might be some sound issues because he had to shift to another device, and I don't know how much time he's going to have on battery and stuff. So all right. So Jeremy, what were you saying when we got cut off? I was.
now it skipped my mind. I forgot.
Um, I think we were talking about the music. Oh no, then we were talking about gaming it and how you can
Oh yeah, okay. So I was saying that it could be a very cool setup, and the spoilers, going to the spoilers, basically they are shown this dollhouse with figures inside that resemble famous people from the martial arts world. Then they are given a tea where they go unconscious. Oh, I'm sorry. Before they go unconscious, they're told, "Oh, these are actual real people that have been shrunk down and forced to stay in this dollhouse." Then they pass out. They wake up, and they are in that same house with those people, and
Yeah.
so they assume that they have been transformed into these, shrunken dolls or whatever. Spoilers: it turns out they are not. It's actually a trick.
Yeah.
But either whether it's a trick or not, I think it would be a really cool thing to throw into a game. And as you mentioned, it would be very tricky to pull it off because it would rely on a lot of factors that would basically involve railroading the players,
Yeah.
probably for the most part. That said, I think you could probably, if you were going to do a one shot, you could probably handle it. If you, like for example, if you have a couple hours to do a one shot, and your setup is a narrated section where you explain to them, you go into this room and they say this, and you drink some tea, and then you wake up, and then you kind of set them up in there as the setup, then that might work. Doing it in live play in an actual campaign would probably be a lot harder.
Also, I think it would work really well in a sandbox as something the players could explore if they choose to, and they go and engage it. But if they leave it alone, it's just that, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
one advantage of sandbox play is you can pop things like that into the setting, and it's, if the players explore it, it's fair game. But if they choose not to, they don't, and so there's no railroading issue. So I think you could do it that way too. Another thought I had is if you did it as this is really you shrinking down and going into a dollhouse, I don't know. I know it's a little bit out of genre, but I feel like that's a little bit more gameable. And I think it's also a little more fun. And there is kind of a tradition in like some of the weirder movies in the genre of things like that happening. So some of the movies push the boundaries a little further, and so I think you could maybe get away with it. You know what I mean? Like have it be a special elixir that makes you diminutive or something. I don't know. Some kind of external alchemy type thing. But what I was thinking is this might be a good plot to blend with. Oh God, what was the movie that The Vanishing was based on? The movie with Kiefer Sutherland where he drinks the coffee and he wakes up in the coffin. I think it was called The Vanishing. Do you know what I'm talking
Could
about?
be. I'm not sure.
There was a French movie it was based on, but basically his girlfriend goes missing, and he spends years trying to figure out what happened to her, and he's obsessed with it, and he eventually finds the guy that's responsible for his disappearance, and the guy explains to him like his whole backstory and like the reason why he's doing stuff. I don't have time to get into that here. It's very interesting, but the bottom line is he says, look, I have this coffee, drink this coffee. If you drink this coffee, you'll find out what happened to your girlfriend. And then the guy wakes up and he finds out what happens to his girlfriend. I think if you had a situation in an adventure where there was a mystery and somebody vanished, and you had an NPC that said, hey, drink this elixir and you can find out what happened, or you can kill me and I'll never tell you what happened. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's an interesting choice for a party to go down. And obviously you don't want the party to wake up in a coffin. That's a little bit too much, I think, in terms of like consequences for a choice like that. But if you had to wake up in a dollhouse, do you know what I mean, where there's an adventure, that would be cool. Another possibility is you could have them drink the thing knowing that they're going to get shrunk down, because in that dollhouse is something that they need to get, but they have to be small to properly explore it. Do you know what I mean? So I think it could work as a, from either angle,
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways you could work it in, and a lot of ways that you could utilize it to make a really fun setting.
Yeah, I think it would be, and I do think a lot of it does pivot on how willing you would be to make it actually a shrink down dollhouse versus whether it would need to be more of the illusionary dollhouse. And I think you can do the illusionary dollhouse too. I just think it would be that probably requires a little bit more forethought. And
well, the way they did it in the movie was they had them like walk out, and they're like, there's a pair of chopsticks, here we go on chopsticks again, but there's a pair of chopsticks that are stuck into the ground, or I think there's a bowl or a cup or something as well, and like they saw that, if I remember, they saw it on the outside and then they see it on the inside, and they're like, oh my God. I mean, that would work in a role-playing game pretty easily because you just describe it. But then again, if the players start looking closely at it, then you're going to have to determine like how likely is it that they'll be able to realize that it's not an actual pair of chopsticks. That's, you know.
Well, and in the book, the way he figures out that he's in a dollhouse is that he can see the sun. Or he's not in a dollhouse. Is that he can see the sun. And he's like, well, wait a second. I wouldn't be seeing the sun if I was in that room with the doll. You know, like it just... And then he explains that to Tian, and Tian's like, yeah, I kind of saw that. I noticed that problem too, but I figured most people wouldn't pick up on it. So, you know, it's and I like also in the movie, it's a little bit of a side note, but one of the things I like in the movie is how they phrase it probably differently than in the original language, but in the translation, she says, you know, we believe that people are jerks and can be easily deceived, and, you know, we can just trick them into thinking that they're inside of a doll. So a lot of the reasons why the plan is maybe so shallow too is because they just have such contempt for regular people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, I thought that was kind of amusing. I don't know if it was meant to be as funny as it landed in the translation, but it landed kind of funny the way that it was phrased. But yeah, I don't know. I think the other thing too I would do is I might take a villain like Tian. And you know, like he's kind of an interesting villain because his whole thing is he does have contempt for people. He thinks that they're easily manipulated by sex, money, power. You know, like all these earthly things are easy tools to control people. And he doesn't seem to be a victim to those things. So I think he feels like he can manipulate other people in the world by using those as lures. And he's also just like really cunning. He's got, you know, he play like, granted, we were talking about how that maybe there were some issues with the plot, but like, you know, he has his daughter marry this guy and be with him for 2 years as part of this plan. That's like a really long-term cunning plan. And then when his daughter doesn't play ball, he starts attacking her, and they're like, "Whoa, what are you doing? She's your daughter." And he's like, "Well, there's precedent of, you know, sons murdering their fathers to become emperor. You know, why shouldn't I, you know, protect my..." You know, so he's just this guy that's operating at like a purely tactical, strategical level, and a level of pursuing massive amounts of power. And I think he'd make a very interesting villain in a campaign. So you could rip.
Yeah, and they also have, there's also some good eccentric like minion characters as well. One of the things that really, I know this is a really odd thing to point out or to have noticed, but there were like 2 zombie style characters.
Yeah.
And when they threw off their like outer robes, the female character was wearing like tight pants, and to me it was really jarring. I was like, I've never seen a woman wearing tight pants in an ancient wuxia setting. It was
jarring. I agree with you. I did notice that. Also, they weren't just tight pants. She had it was like bandages wrapped around her legs, right? So they kind of looked like mummies almost. Like it was like mummy type bandages. So maybe they were supposed to be a zombie sect. So maybe that's why they were doing that. The interesting thing about that sect is the actress playing that character also played Mei Chao Fung in the Brave Archer series, and it's just interesting that they said that Mei Chao Fung was one of their ancestors. So you know, I thought I was that because that line was always jarring to me. It's like, why'd they throw that in there? And then you have, you know, so. But I also kind of like how sometimes in the movies they do kind of mix the franchises like that, and you have like this shared universe that emerges as a result. Even though in this case it was like very, you know, just this one little thing that kind of pokes its head into the story, and that's about it. Oh, can you hear me? Are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can. Your video just went down.
Okay, there we go.
But yeah, no, I thought that was striking. I also like that scene, and I think there are lots of other really eccentric characters that would be interesting for a campaign. Same with the book. I mean, one of the things that really stands out about the book is just all these eccentric characters that, like, I was reading a description on SPCnet because I was trying to find out what happens in the second book. So I was just reading everything I could, and it just became a discussion about Gulong stories, and and you know, people like them or they don't. Some people are really turned off by his stories because they're a particular way, and there was somebody on there that wasn't as enthusiastic about Gulong as we are. He was saying, he was like, these Gulong stories, it just turns into like a bunch of freaks just showing up and like, you know, just
that sounds about right.
Yeah, it's a very, and I think there was a, you know, I think he basically said that and something about it just sounding like, you know, it's like a drunken writer just kind of, you know, losing track of the story type thing. But I like all of these eccentric characters that are there, and again, they're in the book, they're in the movie. You know, Hawk King was one that you mentioned that's interesting. There's a lot of others in the book. What you get is a lot more of the hypocrisy of all of these characters who are supposed to be like really noble, and they all turned out to be like super cunning and evil in their own way. So like the guy who's like, I think they call him like the most noble gentleman. It turns out, and he's got this reputation for like how he's always really nice to women and stuff like that. It turns out he's like a pervert, and you can't trust him at all with women. There's, you know, like the guy, you know, whatever they're known for, it seems that they're kind of like the opposite is the idea. And Zhao Shilong is this character who's just getting blamed for all of these crimes that he didn't commit, and it's easy for everybody to blame him because he's like this low character that's associated with banditry, when in fact he's really more of like a Robin Hood type. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah. But yeah, so I don't know. Anything else in terms of game ability that leaps out, or
nothing that jumps to mind other than the fact that it just has a lot of the tropes that are Gulong's famous for, and you know, we try to put into the game. Even just the premise of the super important weapon that everybody wants, which is really key to the setting we created.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely you know. This is definitely both a movie and a book where I think it fits right in with the Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades thing. It definitely fits in. And yeah, so I don't know. Is there? I don't know if we have anything that we can announce, right? Like the book is officially out now, right? Like February was the month that it was. It's been officially out for a long time, but now it's available in the United States in print, and so you know, people can get.
It's out everywhere, so people can get it. Reviews are, I think, finally kind of starting to come in. I saw one on Amazon saying it's the best WUXIA RPG in existence. So that's
I haven't seen that one yet. So
yeah, so that's nice, and it's also available on PDF on their website. You know, I have tons of resources on my website in terms of links to all of the episodes of our podcast to make it easy for anyone who hasn't seen them. I have links to some of the video reviews and unboxings, and I have links to all of the movies that we recommend and just all sorts of stuff. So you can check out my website, which is jeremybai.com, for that. And I don't think we have any other news we can share at the moment.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so we'll head out, and we'll be back on with another episode sometime soon. Until then, people should, you know, do what Jeremy said and check out the game on the Osprey website and at Drive Through RPG, and check out Jeremy's website. Check out my blog. Jeremy, what's your URL so people can go there?
It's my name, jeremybai.com, or you can just Google search me and it'll come up.
And you can, for me, you can do bedrockgames.net or the Bedrock blog. I'm terrible at pronouncing this. Oh, also, the links on my website for things went down, apparently, for all of the print stuff. They're back up. I don't know what happened, but over the weekend there was a problem. So if anybody had any issues, those are all up. And until next time, we will talk to you later.
With the laughter comes the rain. With my anger comes a tide of emotion, killing joy, cutting steel across your eyes. Are you dead or insane as you stumble through the night? Soothe the anguish and the pain with the soft taste of